Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Bent, and today I'll be discussing a book review on The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. So, for those of you who are familiar with the name, it's been a very highly regarded and recommended book. The famous value investor Warren Buffett has actually said that The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith is one of the 4 most prominent books in his library in terms of modern day economics. I went into reading this book with pretty high expectations, but I found the result to be quite surprising. Exceeded expectations. Really, that comes down to the fact that Smith is, quite frankly, the father of modern day economics. His economic principles of free market and capitalism, the assumption that all people are income maximizing, are absolutely fascinating to read. And if you have the chance, I highly recommend it. Now, in my report, I go through 3 key arguments in addition to summarizing the piece that are as follows. First, I argue that the principle of all people being income maximizing is actually not true. I believe that people have a certain risk tolerance, and that if we define people based off their risk tolerance, it becomes much more clear who the risk seekers and income maximizers are. Secondly, it seems to me like the US tax system has been somewhat derailed from Smith's economic principles and the tax system that he argues for. So I state in my report that the tax system should be marginally changed to incentivize businesses to stay in the United States rather than leave the United States via inversion mergers. And third, I argue that stock compensation is a very just way to incentivize employees to work harder, produce more, and ultimately turn more people into income maximizers. Smith begins the book by giving a brief description of the importance between trade and specialization. He furthers his argument by showing that the laws of supply and demand, when in imbalance, can actually cause a price change. But what's most important here is that Smith argues that all of these changes happen instantaneously without intervention from the government. And what this principle does is lead us to the general maxim of the book, which is that markets should be free and that governance should be minimal. Smith furthers this notion that people are income maximizing by taking it a step further and saying that people make the best decisions for themselves based off of income maximization potential. And for this reason, the government should play no role whatsoever in making decisions for their citizens. By this, what Smith means is that the government shouldn't tariff against the imports or exports of an industry, because what that would do is favor a certain market player or a certain market geography over another. And in turn, the price of those goods would be affected, normally becoming higher if, tariffed or taxed, and ultimately hurting the consumer. Another one of Smith's core principles is that trade is not zero-sum. At the time, the mercantilist system was the dominant system in economics, and what this system proposed was that the nation with the most gold is the nation that's the most rich. Well, Smith took a different approach. Smith believed that the production possibilities of a nation is what truly give a nation power, and because of this, trade is of utmost importance. Smith concludes his narrative by showing us that the tax system should be minimized in order to maximize the wealth of its individuals. Furthermore, this taxes should be specifically placed on the profits of a business so as to incentivize business risk takers or income maximizers to continue taking economic risk without diminishing the capital base from which those profits that are taxed are derived. Now, the arguments that I propose against and for Smith are as follows. First, I think that people are not income maximizing. In fact, I think if we actually look at people and the way they make their decisions, I think you can group them into 3 different brackets: risk seekers, risk averse, and risk neutral. Risk seekers align most closely with Smith's argument of income maximizers. Essentially, these are the people in society who start businesses, who invest their own money or other people's money, and who look to generally maximize their wealth by taking on risk. Now, the risk averse and the risk neutral types of people don't look to do this. They look to work for a risk seeker in a company, in a corporation, and this is all very important. The world needs all three types. There's only certain room for risk seekers, right? There can't be 5 CEOs, there can only be 1 CEO. Secondly, I believe the US tax system has slightly derailed from Smith's tax system that he presents. Even though taxes continue to be on business profits, if one really analyzes the current US tax system, you see there's 2 areas of weakness. First, the US tax system charges a rate of 35% corporate income tax. Second, the US tax system also charges what's known as a repatriation tax, or a tax on foreign profits that are repatriated to the United States. Now, what these 2 taxes do are disincentivize businesses from keeping their headquarters in the United States. Why pay a repatriation tax on income earned abroad when you could actually headquarter your company in another country and avoid this tax? So to counteract this, the market, as hypothesized by Adam Smith, reacted in a fashion that was very natural. Companies began to leave the United States in search of lower taxes. Now, this whole process became known as inversion mergers, and it was quite popular in 2015. An inversion merger simply is when a company purchases another company in a foreign tax district, and during that process inverts their tax structure to then be domiciled in the foreign country. So to counteract this, I believe the US should examine their tax system and look to restructure. Quite simply, if our tax on corporate income is 35%, while the tax of countries such as Ireland is 12.5%, it only makes sense for us to reduce our taxes, or else take on the risk of companies leaving the country. Furthermore, I think that the repatriation tax should be almost completely gotten rid of. It doesn't really make sense that we charge this repatriation tax while other countries do not. An alternative could be a repatriation tax holiday. This occurred in 2004, the last time, and during it, companies were allowed to repatriate their income for 5.25% tax. So it was a little bit better, but at the same time, more improvements could be made that would make the US more competitive. Finally, I agree with Smith that incentivizing people to work through giving them the proper payment structure is critical to creating income maximizers. So to incentivize more people to work, I think that people should be paid in stock. Quite simply, we see this very commonly in the tech and the startup world. People are given stock in their business, and the upside potential of the company is left into their own hands. What this does is incentivizes them to work harder and to produce more for these new companies. Also, as a result, this harder work can lead to more success in the company. But at the end of the day, those who are taking on more risk deserve the possibility of higher compensation. So if more companies were to incentivize their employees with stock rather than simply salary, I believe we could actually see an increase in the productivity from our workers, and ultimately what that could lead to is inflation, that 2 to 4% inflation that the Fed targets. In conclusion, I've given you all a summary of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I found it to be an absolutely fascinating book. I could go on for, honestly, hours. It was just a pleasure to read. But rather than that, I recommend you all pick up a copy at your local bookstore during this Christmas holiday.